and welcome to another episode of Just Asking. Today, we're looking at Africans who are making a difference. It is my pleasure to welcome you, Choice Okoro. Who is Choice Okoro and what do you do?
Choice Okoro is a Nigerian woman and a proudly African woman who's worked in the area of humanitarian affairs, development, international development now for about 20 years. I've been blessed to serve in the area of communication and advocacy, and I say advocacy is making things that do not exist. My passion, I work with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and I consider that a blessing because it's giving me a platform to actually live what I call my calling. The UN is indeed is increasingly becoming a very significant, institution for Africa, and it's a privilege to serve in this capacity. But I've been with the UN now for 5 years. Before that, I worked in international development. I've worked mainly around the world. I've worked in Nigeria a lot. I've worked in Switzerland. I would say I've worked around the world, really.
A truly international citizen.
Yes.
What would you say is the role of the United Nations in Africa?
The United Nations is indeed a very significant institution for Africa, and has been able to support many countries here towards achieving their goals in terms of in the democratic realm, brought different parties to the table in some areas where you have protracted conflict. There's been some achievement there, but there's some glaring struggles, of course. If we look at the situation in Somalia, if we look at the protracted conflict in areas like DRC, but these are government, of course. These are domestic issues where the UN has partnered in terms of support. The UN has succeeded in that sense, but like many international organizations, still struggling, in terms of some of the issues. I'd say it's succeeded. That's where you have some of the challenges as well. For me, working in the UN, I came in at a pretty much senior level, and I've always thought that we make the UN. The UN is not an empty institution. It's made by the caliber, the kind, and the passion we bring in as staff. So the role of the UN I equate to my role. So if you say, well, how do you see? The UN must listen to member states, must work with member states, must recognize that one cloth does not fit all, must be able to adapt development goals and agendas to suit member states. It's the United Nations, we all own it. But I believe the role of the quality, the caliber, the commitment of the staff of the UN make the UN.
And what is your role, your own specific role at the UN?
I came in specifically in the last 5 years. I was recruited into the UN to perform a specific role, and I'm grateful for that. I'm passionate about it, and that is bringing the voice of affected communities into decision making. I was brought in specifically to address a critical issue here in the Horn of Africa. I don't know if we know this, but close to about 20 million in population, or about 100 million in Africa, are nomadic. They make their livelihood out of mobility, out of moving and raising livestock in a nomadic way. We call them pastoralists, and we call them the nomadic population in West Africa. It's a significant livelihood group, critical for ensuring security in the Horn of Africa, for instance. You find them in the arid and semi-arid lands. They've been able to eke a living out of lands that otherwise would not be used. But often they are so ignored. They are usually far away from the center of decision making and ignored in terms of their voices in decision making. I was brought in, and I think that's one way the UN is rising to meet the need of our continent of Africa. I was brought in to ensure that an African Union policy, to support the African Union policy for this particular population, to ensure that the voices of affected population would feed it.
Did you work from your office in Nairobi, or did you have to go to the communities out there?
I traveled. It was a continental policy, so I traveled to, you find the pastoralists in Karamoja, in Uganda. You find them in lots of them in Southern Sudan, huge population in Southern Sudan. They make up the major livelihood group in Somalia. You find a major significant livelihood group in Ethiopia. You find them in 70%. In fact, 70% of the landmass of Kenya, you find the pastoralists. Those are the Asals. About 66% in Sudan, Southern Sudan. Ethiopia is the same. There's a huge population here. I went to see them. Wow. Yes, I went into those communities, which has never been done, I think, before. And with the UN resources, supported and funded by the UN. And to go into those areas to understand what the issues are, why the insecurity. These areas are the predominant areas where you've had increased fighting, where you have issues of free flow of small arms. So the security of the Horn of Africa lies to some extent to finding security for this population. So those were the people. You have free flow. It's considered highly insecure, but you cannot design a policy for affected communities without meeting these people. We've heard of drought. Drought has been one disaster that has befallen, that has affected this region for years. You know, it's recurring. You get it every 2 years. These are the population most affected. We have 3.8 million in Kenya, for instance, who are dependent on food aid. 99% of the population dependent on food aid in Kenya are pastoralists from these areas. It's the same thing for Uganda. It's the same thing for South Sudan. It's a significant challenge here. For too long, I think, for this continent, one of the problems we have is that we often separate policies we make from the people who will live with them. We need better consultations for this continent. We can no longer, I believe that you cannot design a policy or an action, anything without bringing in the voice of the people. And very often, the perception is that it's too rigorous a process, it's too exhaustive. You can get representation from communities and have some consultative process before you design policies that affect people's lives. And
sorry, don't these communities have their own representatives or spokespersons?
That is being done. There's effort to do that now, and that's come from advocacy, some of the work, agencies have done in terms of empowering, creating the opportunities of voices like that to come. Pastoralists have been hugely marginalized. They've been what they call the frontiers through the whole development and creation of states here. So they were divided. These are communities that were separated through divisions, like in Eastern Africa. The separation happened really without much consideration for this population. And because they move, if you have a mobile population, very often they're not exactly very attractive to politicians because it's difficult to access them for political purposes, for votes. But it can be manipulated for that as well. So these are the challenges. And these nomadic populations have their own lifestyle. And it's the same thing as the Aboriginals of North America. These are populations usually who are I would call the First Nations of many of these countries, and very often the development of those nations kind of leave them behind, in a way. Sometimes deliberately, sometimes due to development policies that don't work in harmony. So they have representatives, but if you think these are marginalized communities, you understand that it's a double. It becomes. It's difficult. It becomes doubly challenging to get them into decision making. So these are the people we reached. We tried to reach, and we did.
When I wake up in the morning, I see a lovely face. Hello, my name is Jody. I'm a singer, songwriter, and a jewelry artist from Nigeria. And I want to say to you, Africa, I love you.
What sort of conclusions did you reach after your visit out to those communities?
So I started using the experience we had with pastoralists as a broadly to look at how policies are designed here. Like I said, across this continent, a significant population who've been neglected by development policies, who are literally stranded by national goals and policies. These are Africans who reside in areas very far from view. When we turn on our TV, for instance, through last year, we saw images of emancipated Kenyans, for instance, who are suffering from drought. These are the population we're talking about. When you don't include voices like that in policy, this is what happens. So we found populations literally deserted, stranded, without adequate support, that they've been left behind by development. Really, what I'm talking about here is how do we bring all Africans, make them participants and bring them along as we move towards a development agenda. We cannot have development if it does not take most of Africans along. And that's what I'm talking about. For Kenya, for instance, the Horn of Africa, they are pastoralists. I know this for a fact. We know this, that the majority of population who are dependent on food aid right now, whose livelihood are being erased, are pastoralists. And as the UN, we provide assistance to population really to help them. So if you have a disaster, for instance, you go into a community, you provide humanitarian assistance in such a way that that particular population is able to become self-sustaining. It is wrong for any community to stay on food aid for a protracted time. It's dehumanizing, it takes away the dignity, and it creates dependency. It does not build any nation. You cannot build any nation from citizens who depend on food aid. That means they are not participating in nation building, they are not involved in any economic activity. So when we got there, we found that increasingly you had this population who through policies were losing their livelihood. This same population were dependent on food aid, and it's a significant amount, and it's a loss for the continent. I guess what I'm trying to say, let's assume you have a population that move. Through history, they've moved. They move because this land does not sustain agriculture long term. You can't grow agriculture, you can't grow anything in this land. You can farm in most of it. They are arid and semi-arid. So you have a particular population that have become really intelligent and have developed knowledge in harmony with the land they know. So they move, because if you move with your livestock, it means you don't overgraze a particular part. When you move, by the time you get to another part, this place has regrown, the pasture has rejuvenated. So you come back after maybe 6 months. So you have a population who move in harmony. This is a huge number, and they've adjusted their lifestyle to suit that movement. Suddenly, we have new policies coming up around these areas. We call them sometimes conservation, and these communities have lived in harmony with nature for a long time. They understand it. We have even tourism. So if you have a place like Tanzania, for instance, when you hear of Ngorongoro, you have a population who've been made sedentary, so that their lands have been taken for tourism. They've been stripped of their livelihood. Lands are being privatized. So they're losing their livelihood. They are destitute by policies that are considered development policies. What happens? We as humanitarian actors meet them, and we feel, okay, we respond to humanitarian needs. That's our mandate. We keep people, we provide humanitarian assistance to keep people alive. Then we provide assistance, which most times is food aid. If you give them food aid, you don't look at policies that will bring them back to their livelihood. You're creating a dependent citizen. People who don't participate in nation building, who are not engaged economically, you deprive people of producing food, put them on food aid. These are people who can support in food insecurity. It is a trend that is growing. I think humanitarian assistance, our mandate with the UN as humanitarian coordinators, we're supposed to ensure that the provision of humanitarian assistance builds people's ability to go back to their livelihood.
At the turn of the century, we had the Millennium Development Goals. Are you saying that most of these goals have not been achieved?
I think this is no time for us to just pull a wool over some of the challenges. I would actually say it's getting worse. Some of the images that support some of those goals, these are indeed great initiatives. But very often I think our problem in the continent gets overtaken by trends and lingos and buzzwords. And I think we don't look behind those buzzwords. Thank you for that question. What happened? Yes, we have the Millennium Development Goals, but we still have some of those challenges. In fact, the humanitarian needs in the continent are increasing. We need to look at Somalia. Right now, for instance, we have close to, on the average, in the middle of the drought, about 1,500 moving into the camps in the Dadaab of Kenya every day. Somalia right now is being emptied literally into Kenya. That's how bad the situation is. So we have the Millennium Development Goal. We have protracted, crises that are not being resolved and are not going in. We have DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. We have the Somalia. Come on, these are nice terms, but I think we have not. When we mentioned that we should look at some of the challenges we face, we have not been able to address. And I think addressing some of those crises will maybe allow us to scrutinize with more integrity an initiative like MDG.
It seems that governments in Africa are not doing enough. It's quite obvious.
I find we have governments here who start. I think we need to scrutinize to what's happening with our government here. We're having a pattern right now where we have such burning. We work together, remember. years ago and got excited around some of the new governments who were coming in there in Southern Africa.
I remember very well.
And 20 years down the line, you're thinking, so what happened? When did this freedom fighter, a motivator, forces we rallied around as hope for the continent, when did they? And how did they end up like this? Something happens, but I think Africans are not holding their government to account enough. It's the ease with which we produce dictators, such leadership, I think, is a reflection on how we're not holding our government to account early enough. We're doing it now, we're getting to do it, but I think we let some of them go on too long. We don't hold them to account. And I don't want to name names because I think it's a phenomenon, it's a trend. So not a particular issue with individuals. We don't hold our government to account. We need to start holding our government to account. We need to have governance systems that are built with integrity, that cannot be changed. There's too much situation of saying you have 2 terms, I'm going to add a 3rd one. We need to make it foolproof. There has to be stronger consequences for flouting, agreed democratic rules like that. There has to be stronger consequences. There's too much ease. And some of the reconciliation or reconciliatory or some of the ways we've started reconciling some of this disagreement is creating a parallel. It's almost making a mockery of the democratic system. So if I disagree, I'll still be in power, then we create a process whereby I don't want to go into details because this is broadly looking at the continent, not naming, scapegoating a few. But you know what I mean? There's a trend. So it's your term. You want to extend it for another term. We let you, insofar as we let the other. So what's the purpose of democracy then? If at the end of the day, you can adjust, we adjust it too easily.
I hear you loud and clear.
You understand? We should put, if you want the systems, if we want it to have accountability, we hold on to it, we don't adjust it. We've done it for how many countries now?
Do you see a situation where what is happening in the Arab world would happen in sub-Saharan Africa?
It goes without saying, it's going to happen. Let's look at Senegal. I don't want to go into details, but look at what's growing there. Let's look at what happened recently in Nigeria. I can talk about Nigeria, I'm Nigerian. So look at what happened. The level of outspokenness needs to be commended. People spoke up, and what we saw recently, the whole Occupy Nigeria, whole struggle. I call it a struggle because it wasn't perfect, but we found that we could speak across ethnic lines. In Nigeria, we have the capacity. We are able to unite in spite of our ethnicity when we have common goals. It's not a hopeless situation. So I looked at that. I said, "There's hope in this." But then again, it demonstrates that our leadership needs to listen to its people. It's not. We are almost having no choice there. So these are some. I really am so positive. There are so many positive things coming out of Nigeria. I don't want to focus on that too much, but that's a clear example of how it's a hopeful example within a negative situation. Within some very serious. These were days we lost lives, so it was a tragedy. It was a tragedy. But you heard people speaking together and clearly, and questioning the country, questioning the leadership, and that's what we need. We need to hold our leadership to account, and I see that happening, and that's hopeful. So what's happening in the Arab world is inevitable.
A lot of Africans are not happy the way politics is played in Africa. That leads me to the next question. Is politics a trustworthy institution?
I think it's a trustworthy institution if you put check and balances in place. I don't believe there's too much emphasis on politicians being upright and right. Human beings, if you have a loose system in place, you don't have the appropriate check and balances, most human beings in politics will take advantage of the system. There are many things we don't do because of the consequences. We don't have a strong enough consequences in Africa, for instance, around not acting right in political office. We don't have good checks and balances. We believe that this man is upright or this woman is upright. She's just going to step into office and do the right thing. That's good. We hope for that. But just in case you don't, here are the consequences. We need to have strong check and balances in place. It's expected that I pay my taxes. But if I don't know what the consequences are, I may not. We are weak as human beings. So it's a very worthy institution. It's a trustworthy institution when you put the right checks and balances in place. In places where they've checked the politicians. It's checked the politicians, ensured that they acted with integrity. Not because they're better than the other person, but because they've sworn to an office that requires some certain certain behavior, certain action, certain way of behaving and acting. And they've followed it because they know what the consequences will be. Where you don't have strong ones, then it becomes a very weak institution and untrustworthy, not because the person is, because the institution is not. And I hold the governed, those that are being governed, to account. Very often we don't hold our politicians to account enough. And I think that's why they get it. So it is a trustworthy institution, but shouldn't be left to politicians alone.